So for the past decade, I've been living here in Walltown in a hospitality house. We were in Iraq at the beginning of the war, and when we were driving out of the country, had a car accident where a car landed in a side ditch, and 3 of our friends stumbled out on the side of the road, their heads bleeding, wondering what was going to happen. They were picked up by a car of Iraqis, taken into the town called Rutba, and in Rutba, a doctor said 3 days ago, your country bombed our hospital, but we'll take care of you. And he saved their lives. And the more we told that story, the more we realized it was a Good Samaritan story, that the people who were supposed to be our enemies, the good Iraqis, the good Muslims, had saved our friends' lives. We had seen what God's love looks like in the 21st century by living that story. And so at the end of it, Jesus says, go and do likewise. And we heard that as a word to us. We came here to Walltown and we started a community called the Rutba House. Said that we wanted it to be a hospitality house, to practice the kind of hospitality that we had received, and to open our door to the stranger, to whoever would come along. We've been welcoming folks into our homes here for a decade now, and over those 10 years we've had some 60 people live here, 60 people, just, you know, a slice of the reality of what homelessness is in this country, people who didn't have somewhere else to live. And yet in that constant effort to try to welcome every guest as if the guest were Christ, we've lived in the midst of a tension that says, on the one hand, sometimes these people have saved us. Sometimes they've opened our eyes to what God is doing in the world, and it's a miracle. It's beautiful. Those are incredible stories to tell. And at the same time, there are those nights when, you know, somebody knocks at the door at midnight and you wonder whether you should go to it, because it might be one more night in the emergency room with somebody who's relapsed again, with a friend who's been so angry with their spouse that they've gotten into a fight and they need to have their cheeks sewed up. So what do you do? What do you do in the midst of that tension? I love this poem by William Stafford called Easter Morning. He says, maybe someone comes to the door and says, repent, and you say, come on in, it's Jesus. That's when all you ever did or said or even thought suddenly wakes up again and sings out, I'm still here. And you know it's true. You just shiver alive and are left standing there, suddenly brought to account, saved. Except maybe that someone says, I've got a deal for you. And you listen because that's how you're trained. They told you always hear both sides. So then the slick voice can sell you anything, even hell, which is what you're getting by listening. Well, what should you do? I'd say always go to the door, yes, but keep the screen locked. Then, while you hold the Bible in one hand, lean forward and carefully say, Jesus? I love that poem because I feel like that is the experience of living in a hospitality house. Every person who comes to the door might be Jesus. And yet, when you've been lied to and stolen from several dozen times, you naturally have a tendency to keep your guard up. How do we live in that tension? How do we live in that tension of knowing that this is the way Jesus comes to us, and yet at the same time knowing that this can be some of the most painful stuff of life to deal with? I think a decade of living here has taught me that it's worth it. It's worth it, but it's not always easy. It's worth it, but it's not always pretty. It's worth it to always go to the door, but we have to constantly keep our eyes wide open We have to constantly be asking, is it you, Jesus? If we're going to see clearly who God is and how God's breaking into our lives.